And they basically answered a lot of questions that I had in the first episode. So the episode starts with, it takes us back to, Dorothy being at the circus. Because remember, in the first episode, they showed her, conjuring like that beast-like creature, and then he was being whipped by the ringmaster, and then she got mad and like killed everybody. So, apparently Niles was there. So it starts with like, it shows a clip of like Niles. I guess, after the mom got killed in like the mountains or whatever, the circus like snatched up his daughter. So he went searching for his daughter. He found his daughter at the circus. He knew about Niles apparently knew about her manifestations. He knew about like her creature conjures. But there was one particular that he heard about, but he was just like, I had to see it for myself. So he goes to the circus. He sees the whole thing unfold where the ringmaster's like whooping the beast, and then the moment where the beast gets angry and then starts killing everybody, and then like this other weird thing manifests, and then Niles he saw the whole thing. There was a moment where one of the beasts recognized him, but it still proceeded to I guess to slaughter everybody. So after it slaughtered everybody, it was just Dorothy there. She was because the beast was like tired, it was injured, it was whooped, whatever. So Dorothy ended up trying to console it, and then the creature disappeared. Niles he walked up to her because out of everybody, I guess he was the only person who did not get slaughtered. So I mean he was beat up, he was bleeding, whatever, but. So he goes up to Dorothy, and then he shows her a picture of the beast creature. He shows her a picture of her mom, and then she's like, "How do you know my mother?" And he's like, "'Cause I'm your daddy." And so that's how he found her. And then he put her in Danny the Street, and kept her there for like 19 years. One thing that he did bring up, and I was surprised that I missed that, because he was just like, after I retrieved my daughter, I had her with me for 2 years. 2 years gone by, and she hadn't aged a day. And I was just like, yeah, she damn sure still is a kid, isn't she? Because that thought never occurred to me, because when they saved her from Danny the Street last season, it never occurred to me that child should be older than what she actually is. So part of her mutant meta ability, I guess, is that she's going to be a child forever, or maybe she just grows at a very slow, slow pace. So so Niles put her in Danny the Street, and then he was just like, because I have to figure out how to live my life in order to protect you. So that's, so he left her with Danny, and then that's when he went to create the Doom Patrol, which was him basically trying to come up with ways to prolong his own life, which I talked about in the last episode. So he had a conversation with Cliff, and Cliff is still pissed. And Cliff was just like, I want to know the whole story about what happened, how everything happened, And then Niles started going through the story about how, he traded the which I said the amulet, prolonged his life. He traded the amulet in. But he told the story about how he tried to get the amulet. So he was just like, this guy had a magical amulet, that would make you live forever. And then Cliff was just like, yeah, so you're broken, you stole it. That's why Mr. Nobody hates you. And that's how the whole season 1 thing happened. He's like, I know that shit. But he was like, I want you to specifically tell me what led to you doing what you did to me. So Chief told him the entire story about, why he did what he did. There was even a moment where he told her that his daughter was expendable in the car crash, which is why he allowed the car crash to happen. And then, Cliff was just like, so what the fuck makes you think that your daughter, was more important than my daughter? And then Niles was just like, backed against the corner, I'd do anything for my child. And I'm like, well, that's everybody, bro. So him and Cliff still aren't vibing. Cliff still hates his guts, and Cliff still ain't fucking with him. So Dorothy's in the kitchen, she's having breakfast, she's with Rita. Jane was asleep, and then one of Dorothy's manifestations pops up in Jane's room. Scares the bejesus out of Jane. Jane goes downstairs, because Jane is not afraid to pull up on a child. So she rolls up on Dorothy, and she's just like, yo, what the F is up with your manifestations coming in my room? And then why are they talking about, because one of them said like, oh, daddy's dying, and then she's like, what are they talking about? And then Dorothy was like, it's not true. And then Rita was like, what's not true? And then she's like, tell us. And then she's like, it's not true. And Rita's like, what's not true? And then Niles is dying, he's not dying. And then they got all mad, and then and then they're just like, they like Jane was just like, yeah, Niles is dying. Dorothy's like, he's not dying. And then Rita was just like, I can't believe it. And then Cliff walks into the room and they're just like, Cliff, did you hear about the chief there? Cliff was like, yeah, the motherfucker's dying. So what? He was just like, let that be a lesson to your kid about karma. So so then, so that after that, so they confront Niles about it, and he's just like, listen, it's not a big deal, don't worry about it, and let's just go on with our business. Larry shows up, because like I said, he was going to his son's funeral. He had, he had his bandages, he was all dressed up, and then, while they were talking to Niles, Niles was just like, yeah, my life is coming to an end, but it's not a big deal. And then Cliff was like, that's bullshit, because he was like, first and foremost, you have a plan B, and your plan B is the Doom Patrol. Because it was just like, you created us specifically for this specific situation. So all you have to do now is tell us which one of us you're going to turn yourself into. Are you going to put your brain inside a machine? Because he was like, because if you do that, you better hug your daughter one last time because you ain't never going to feel her again. Are you going to turn yourself into the human blob? Are you going to create like multiple personalities? Are you going to, nuke yourself in bandages? He didn't bring up Cyborg, which I thought was interesting. So he was just like, he was like, yeah, he's like, which one of us are you going to be? And then Larry was like, he's not going to be any of us because we're the failed experiments. So Niles isn't going to turn himself into any of us. And then Larry dipped and went to his son's funeral. So then, so later on, Niles was just like, he was just like, just leave it to be. He's like, I'm not your concern anymore. And, let me do me. Let me go on about my business. So then, so he's trying to figure out how to save himself. Rita talks to him. And then while him and Rita are talking, he told Rita about this one thing called continuinium that can prolong a person's life, because it can manipulate time, but it's controlled by this guy called Dr. Tyme. So Rita was just like, well, let's come up with a plan to get the continuinium. And then Niles is like, no, don't do it, Rita. So then, so she gets the gang together, or who's left of the gang. She gets Jane and Cliff, and then she's just like, Niles told me about this continuinium, and we have to get this guy named Dr. Tyme. And then Cliff's like, fuck that, I'm not helping him. He's like, I'm not helping him. He doesn't deserve my help. And then, Jane, she was like, I am going to help him, because Jane was just like, what's going on with my personalities? I don't know what's happening. The underground is in disarray. And she was like, I need Niles to help me save the underground. So she was like, I actually need this son of a bitch, to stay alive. So if this will prolong his life, I'm down for it. And then, so then Niles shows up and he's just like, don't do it on my behalf. Like, don't try to save me. And then Cliff was like, hold up. So you don't want us to save you? Then he was like, no, don't save me. He was just like, so let me get this straight. You're telling us you do not want us to go after this Dr. Tyme guy to prolong your life. You'd rather just leave it be and for you to die. And he was like, yes, that's exactly right. And Cliff was like, well, I'm doing it then. So Cliff is doing the complete opposite of what, of what the chief wants, just out of spite, just out of like pure, 100% spite. So the chief is like, fine, so he does this thing where he creates like this time ring, and it's gonna transport Jane, Cliff, and Rita. It's gonna transport them into a specific time. I think it was like the 1980, like a day in 1980 or whatever. So they all had to say where they were on that date. They all said where they were, because again, these mofos are old, and they, and it's funny because, when they asked Niles how old he was, because remember he had the necklace that prolonged his life, Niles was like, I'm 139 years old. And the Rita was like, oh dear God, you're old. And I'm like, bitch, you like Rita's at least like 80, 90. Like, so she ain't that far off. So anyway, so that's why, like, when they said, where were you on this day, both Jane and Rita were at Doom Manor, because, they're old, and that's where they were. So Cliff, he said he was like banging some chick or whatever. And then, so they get transported to, I guess, like the late 70s or the early 80s or something like that. They're in like this disco hall. Dr. Tyme is there having a roller skating concert or whatever. And then, he notices the three of them. He's like, oh, you're Rita Fall. I know Rita Fall. And then, the two of them have a conversation. They start roller skating off together. So, but the plan was, they said that the guy had continuinium in his, in his helmet. So they were just like, you gotta snatch the helmet to get the continuinium out. So Dr. Time, he knew that. He was just like, okay, so you guys want my continuinium, but he was like, that's kind of disappointing. But he's like, but many have tried and nobody can get it. Cliff ends up saying, to hell with this. And then he just tries to run up on the dude. And like, he ended up like breaking the DJ tables. And then when Dr. Time tried to run up on Cliff to stop him from destroying the disco, Rita used her stretch powers. She grabbed Dr. Time by his helmet, and then she tried to rip the helmet off of his head. The dude slipped and cracked his head wide open, and his brain fell out onto the floor because, come to find out, that wasn't a helmet on his head. That's the dude's actual head. And Rita just split his head wide open. So his brain is now like rolling over the floor. Everybody's trying to get their hands on it because his brain holds the power to controlling time. Rita feels bad. She runs up on dude. She's trying to like see if he's okay, whatever. Cliff's trying to keep people from getting the brain. And then because Rita felt guilty about splitting his head open, because the guy's head, because I said it looks like a helmet, but it's his head. His head is basically a clock. His head is a clock with eyes. It has like arms on, clock arms on, and everything. So Rita felt bad because she split him open. So she took the hands of Time on his face, and she started turning them backwards, and she reversed time and put everything back to normal, and the guy's head went back to normal, and then she saved his life. And then as soon as she saved his life, he looked at her and he was just like, your mother was right. You ain't shit. You ain't never gonna be shit, and everything you do ain't gonna be worth shit. And then he like blasted them back, back to the present. So then while they were doing that, there was a moment where when the dude's brain was on the floor, Cliff and Jane tried to pick up the brain, and they both touched it. And Cliff saw flashbacks of Niles cutting him open and putting him together to turn him into a robot. Jane was having flashbacks of one of her personalities that was being drowned, like old school Christian style, and trying to defeat Satan because they thought the girl was possessed. So there was one personality specific that took over the body and knew exactly what to say to everybody to get them to chill. And I think her name was Miranda. And then Jane was having a conversation with one of the other personalities, and then they were just like, and Jane was like, I've never seen this memory before. And they were just like, yeah, that was a memory from Miranda. And then everybody thinks that Miranda should be the one to take over as the primary body. And then Jane was like, why is Miranda such a good idea to take over? And then the other personality, she was like, because Miranda's the one person that knows what the child wants. And I guess the child is the vessel. I mean, I'm going to assume the child is like the vessel that they're all in, but Jane is basically like, and I said this before, Jane's actual personality, her original personality, that's the kid that everyone keeps talking about. An experiment must have been done where they killed like 64 women and put their consciousness all into one body, and Jane just happened to be the one that took over for as long as she did. But Kay, who's the actual is the actual vessel's like persona, I guess she's like vulnerable, or she's the one that's traumatized because of what happened to her. So all the other 64 personalities are there to protect that one girl. But Miranda, they said that Miranda understands the kid, so Miranda should be the primary. So Jane's trying to she's struggling with that about should she let Miranda take over or not. So then Cliff goes back, and then so Cliff's upset because he's just like, oh, Niles fucked up my life, and Cliff's trying to get his revenge. And and then Rita's trying to cope with this, with what was said to her, because again, Dr. Time told her something that her mom said her, that she was basically worthless. And then that's when Dorothy knocked on her door and was just like, can you teach me how to bake cookies or pancakes or whatever? And then Dorothy was showing the child how to cook. So at least Rita was showing Dorothy how to cook. So at least Rita's making herself useful, despite what was said about her, from her mom. And that was that was basically how about how those characters' storylines ended. Cyborg, he ended up going to group therapy. He showed up late for therapy. There was this black girl there. She had a cane, and she was talking about her war experiences and her trauma. They made a big deal out of Cyborg, having his powers and his camera on. They made him shut his system off. Cyborg chose not to share his feelings with the group. And he just listened. He later went to talk to the girl. The two of them had a conversation. The girl said that the reason why she was at therapy, it wasn't because of her time in the war, but because she lost her mom. And then Cliff, and then Vic was just like, well, I lost my mom too. The two of them had like a little bonding moment, and then they ended up, after group, they ended up going out to dinner or whatever. After dinner, they had a nice conversation. You could tell the two of them are vibing, like they're getting along. They said their goodbyes, and then the girl ended up getting robbed. Like some kid tried to steal her purse, and because she's on a cane, Vic came running over to try to help her, but because she was in the army, she basically whooped dude's ass despite having the disability, and she knocked the kid down, and then like she got her purse back, and then Vic was just like, the police are on her way, and then the girl was like, no, she's like, don't call the cops, because she was like, he's just a kid. And, we need to give him a second chance, because if you put him in the system, he'll never have a chance to actually turn his life around. And then Vic was just like, I just scanned this kid, and this fool he done committed 3 crimes. So how many chances? He's like, he's already had his 3 chances. So it's like, how many chances is he going to get? And then she was just like, well, he's a kid, so it's like as many as it takes, because, you can't give up on him. And then two of them just went back and forth about, second chances versus criminals. And then, Cyborg, he ended up letting the kid go. He was just like, all right, we'll do it your way. He let the kid go. The two of them just kind of like looked at each other, because I think there was like obviously there's an attraction, but there's also like a mutual respect there as far as them having a healthy argument about their views on what to do with like criminals or whatever. So the two of them starting to have like a little thing going. So then after that, then he was just like, I'll see you at group, and then the two of them walked away. So she could be the person that pulls Cyborg out of his mental funk, because like when you go through some drama or whatever, beautiful company is always a good a good answer to to those problems. And then finally, Larry, he goes to his son's funeral. His other son was there. He spoke to his other son. They had a conversation. His son knew it was him because he heard his voice, and he was just like, wow, you're my dad. And then he was like, Gary was right, you're still alive. And then they invited him. He was just like, you should come to Gary's house and celebrate with the rest of us, because we're going to honor him. We're going to have like a little memorial, like honoring him. Larry shows up to the house. He cowers out. He goes out like punk. He decides not to go into the house, but the spirit was telling him to go into the garage. Larry goes into the garage, and he sees newspaper clippings of himself, like, where's Larry Trainor? What happened to Larry Trainor? And his son was researching, his disappearance, because his son never believed that Larry was dead. He always believed that his dad was still alive. And his son went crazy trying to figure out what happened to his dad, so, and then, then Larry felt bad and he started crying. And then like this butterfly came out of nowhere and like landed on his shoulder. So then Larry leaves. He's trailing it home. He's I don't know how he got there. First of all, the fact that he was trying to like hitchhike, I'm like, bro, how did you get there? But he's hitchhiking on the side of the road, trying to get a ride. Nobody's picking him up, because obviously like it's, he has bandages on, he look crazy, and it's in the middle of nowhere. Ain't nobody doing that, especially like ain't no black people picking him up. I know that much. So, and then after that, while he's trying to hitchhike, like the same butterfly lands on his hand. He looks at the butterfly. He looks over into the field. He sees a shitload of butterflies, and then all the butterflies just consume him and like snatch him up, and then that's how the episode ended. My prediction for that: maybe his son has superpowers, or this is either like some brand new character that's just trying to help out, or the butterflies have something to do with his son. But that whole thing was kind of weird and kind of freaky. And so Rita's gonna obviously end up becoming like a mentor to to Dorothy. Niles is still trying to search for, his longevity, and Cliff's basically going to continue to be an asshole, because he's not forgiven Chief under any circumstances based on what happened to him. And obviously there's going to be an episode where Cliff talks to his daughter. Jane's probably is going to let Miranda take over for a little bit. So we're going to get to know Miranda, and then eventually like, actual crazy Jane will pop up again. But we will see who this K person is before the season's over. That's a prediction as well. So thank you for tuning in. Episode 3 coming. So we'll chop that up, and then hopefully we can put some more pieces together and try to connect the dots on this Doom Patrol trade. So leave a comment, like, and subscribe. Let me know what you think is going to happen to these characters going forward, and we'll sit there and talk about it. So for Doom Patrol episode 2, take care, and I'm out this bitch.